Hey everybody, welcome to the 2025 Summer of Protocols Town Hall, and our weekly guest talk series, an event where we explore the frontier of protocol studies with industry experts, founders, protocol researchers, and other brilliant minds. Today's guest is Nadia Asparouhova, a writer and researcher who has published a ton of excellent pieces online and in print, including working in public in her most recent book, Anti-Memetics: Why Some Ideas Resist Spreading. She's an expert at 0 to 1 research, tackling unanswered questions about the world, and she was a part of the SOP 23 program, where she published a cool essay called Dangerous Protocols. Hello, Nadia. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Timber. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. I wanted to start off with kind of a fun question about SCP. So, what is SCP, and what is SCP Object 55, and do you think it's real?
Short answer, yes, I think it's real. Just by way of explanation, so this idea of anti-memes was coined by this author who goes by the pseudonym Quantum, and it came from this fictional wiki community, which I didn't even know that fictional wikis were a concept until fairly recently, but it's an entire community where they post wiki entries of unusual paranormal phenomena, and it's this sort of fictional universe that's constructed around that. And so many years ago, take notes on it, they can look at it, everything is fine, but as they step away, then somehow their memory of SCP just sort of fades, and they're left looking at their notes, wondering what was I looking at, what was I interacting with, is this even real? So yeah, it's presented as this fictional concept. That's where the idea of anti-meme sprung from. Yeah, I absolutely think it's real. I think I feel like I see it in thinking about, like late night internet browsing or whatever, where you kind of go down these weird rabbit holes and stuff, and then you kind of leave all the tabs open on your laptop or your phone, and the next morning you kind of look at it and you're just like, God, like what was I looking at last night? It's kind of that same sort of sensation.
Yeah, I feel that. And then you get echoes of it in your ads on Instagram and whatnot. You're like, well,
Yeah,
maybe I was looking at this.
Please stop following me. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that you brought up that I thought would be fun to talk about as well, since a lot of people here have also read Venkat's blog, Ribbon Farm, which is now Contraptions, is the idea of the cozy web, which is kind of like these enclaves of people thinking about stuff and writing to each other about various things, and about how, even though it sounds like this nice, cute little term, cozy web, it may not be such a good thing. So how does this tie into your concept of anti-memetics and Venkat's idea of the cozy web?
Yeah, I really love that Venkat posted a Substack note maybe a couple days ago, where classic curmudgeonly Venkat saying that I kind of regret he was saying he kind of regrets coining this term cozy web, which came out of that sort of strange time around 2019, 2020-ish, where it felt like our public feeds were sort of at capacity. They were exploding. Everyone was super, super angry all the time and calling each other out. And then you had this sort of like trickling down layer of people starting to retreat from the public feeds and creating this cozy web where it's like, oh, I can talk to my friends. I have, group chats. I have newsletters. It's sort of like semi-private version of the internet that is being created. And I think it was a really useful concept to for most of us at the time, where I think we're feeling this like shift from the classic Web 2.0 public social feeds kind of era to something a little bit more semi-private that did feel cozy at the time, because it was in contrast to just the highly conflict-ridden kind of public world. So it was a very term at the time, but I definitely smiled when I saw Venkat saying now, like, I kind of regret using this term because it's sort of implying something that I think is not really correct. And so for me, at least, I think like my two sort of critiques of the cozy web would be, one, we think that by constructing this cozy web around ourselves, we are somehow isolating ourselves from the mimetic contagion of the outside world. And in my book, I compare this to like COVID pods, where it's like, yeah, in theory, you think, oh, I'm interacting with my 10 friends or my 5 friends, whatever. And if we only interact with each other, then we're safe from COVID. We're not going to get sick. And everyone knows in reality, if you live through COVID, that you can't really control what your other 10 friends are doing. And of course, they're going out, they're going to the grocery store, they're going to gym, whatever. they're interacting with the rest of the world, they're going to bring back some sort of contagions, and then you're actually sort of like compressing that in these small areas. So it's like moving from one poorly ventilated room to another and kind of hoping you're not getting sick because you're not walking around in the fresh air. And so I think the group chats and other sort of like smaller, even newsletters and stuff, these sort of semi-private, semi-isolated feeling areas can feel safer because you're insulating yourself from the super crazy public feeds, but actually you can it can sort of compress ideas, make them crazier and weirder. Sometimes that's good. It means you can workshop ideas faster, you can evolve ideas faster, but it can also be a bad thing where sometimes ideas can get really, really crazy really quickly because you just have people sort of like all feeding each other. And I talk about some of those examples as well in the book. And I think the other issue with the cozy web, which I think is more of maybe Venkat's critique, is uh, uh, we can't really permanently escape the responsibilities of the rest of the world. I think probably call this something like Venk has called this like Walden ponding, right? Where it's sort of like I can't handle what's going on out there, so I'm just gonna like hang out with my friends over here, and everything feels safe and good. If everyone did this, nothing would ever get done, right? Take it to its extreme. And I think I would challenge people to say, you know, like we have a responsibility to the rest of the outside world. This is sort of like fleeing the cities for the suburbs or something. Just living in your gated communities. There is still, you know, it's not like we replaced the public feeds with the cozy web. It's that there's some. We now just have like two parallel ecosystems, and you know they interact with each other. They feed into each other. Whatever happens in your group chats makes its way back out into the real world and vice versa. And yes, I think there's maybe a challenge there of, you know, it feels really cozy, but one, it's not actually as safe as you think it is. And two, being cozy long term is maybe, you know, not the best thing for the world if everyone did the same thing.
Yeah, I really appreciated how you used like a different analogy than what most people I think would default to echo chamber when you talk about the cozy web and like these spaces, but like using epidemiology and like the transfer of these ideas through memes, which is very much like genes and viruses, was a fresh way to look at it. And like with the COVID pod, as soon as you get in that COVID pod, you're like, well, it's safe if everybody maintains their level of security with everybody else, which they don't. So then you let your guards down inside, and then you just have these really like tight knit areas of spread where people think they're safe, but because of that uh, illusion of security, they're actually like very compromised to bad ideas, which is the downside. And I was curious, like in writing this book, like you took the analogy of epidemiology like way further than I thought it could be stretched, and it worked really well. Like, and I was wondering if you ran into any like hard walls with it, like if the analogy started to break down at some point, because I was like, I kept waiting for it to like break, but it kept going and going and going and working super well.
Yeah. I was trying to think about this. Yeah, I think the parallels to epidemiology were I got, you know, I kind of took what was useful from it, and I didn't feel myself running into any sort of limitations in the process of writing about it, but just sort of in reflecting about it a little bit more now, I think there is something about maybe the way that we interact with ideas versus the way that we interact with pathogens that is not fully captured by the analogy. So, um, you know, we generally don't want to be infected by a pathogen, but I think sometimes we do want to be infected by an idea. Sometimes it's a specific idea that we wish we could fall in love with, but just isn't speaking to us. Sometimes it's this, you know, deeper search for meaning and just wishing that something would come along and infect us so we could dedicate our life's purpose to it. And so I think there's that sort of changes the relationship between people and ideas versus people and pathogens. I don't really know if I believe this fully or not, but I think that we have more control over what we choose to be infected by ideas wise versus pathogens. This is gonna get us into a whole free will debate, so we won't I won't go down that path. But yeah, I mean, you can't really like think your way out of being infected by a virus, for example. It's like it's a little bit more deterministic. But I think if people can sort of like draw their attention to, which ideas am I getting excited by, which ones am I not? How do I choose what I, spread throughout the rest of the world, pass on to others? You'll find that there is like a finer degree of control. So it's not a perfect analogy in that way.
Yeah, that's interesting because you wouldn't. It's hard to think of a virus where you'd be like, yeah, I really want this thing to infect me. And
The problem is every time I think of an example like this, and I'm just like, well, like there are probably some crazy people who really want to be infected by certain viruses. So,
there's
um,
like this one that this biologist Robert Sapolsky, he talks about all the time. It's like a virus that's found in mice, and then cat eat the mice, and they
uh,
become like super, like they're okay
just
with the smell of rats or something. Like they no longer go after it. But the problem is, oh no, it's rats that get infected, and then they are no longer afraid of cats. But the disease can jump to humans. And what this research lab found is that many people who die in motorcycle accidents are infected with this virus. So it's like this particular thing that for some reason turns off the risk receptors in your head. So maybe if you were like really averse to gambling and you wanted to get infected by that to increase your risk taking, you could.
sounds cool.
Um, I was curious. I asked this to a couple friends because I was like, "Have you been exposed to any sort of anti memes today that you know of, but you keep like kind of forgetting about because there's something about it that just makes you forget?" But it's this kind of important underground thing that's going on that's very impactful. And I was wondering if you had, you know, taken note of any sort of current anti memes that you could point to.
Yeah. Yeah, recurring ones, I mean, just like on a personal level, I think there are a lot of like I talk about different classes of anti-memes, and some of them are on a collective level. So it's like, a forbidden idea that everyone kind of knows, but like isn't expressing to the rest of their networks. But there's also anti-memes that occur on sort of like a personal level where it's like a cognitive bias or a blind spot where it's something that you should be doing or something you think you should care about, but like you just can't really bring yourself to. And so, yeah, one of the examples I talk about in the book is like estate planning for me, where like when my husband and I had our first child, it was just sort of like, okay, like that it's really, really, really important that you now have a dependent, and if something were to happen, like you do not want to leave this person without any sort of support in the world or uh, with any sorts of like logistical complications. And somehow it's just like really, really hard to think about estate planning, not just because it's boring and arduous, but like it's also just uncomfortable. Like because to acknowledge the importance of estate planning would mean that you have to acknowledge that there's a chance that both of us die and leave our child orphan, knock on wood, and that's like a terrible thing to think about. Uh, so I think those kinds of tasks are in any sort of like long-term thinking. Like I see it in friends as well, where it's like they don't really want to think about marriage or kids or something, or people are really uncomfortable thinking about death, and it's just sort of like something that you might know is important to acknowledge, but you just keep blocking it out of your memory. I definitely felt this with I think like childbirth is like kind of a classic anti-mimetic story or example, right? Where the trope goes, and I think it's true. It's you experience something really, really intense and kind of arduous in the moment that is honestly not necessarily pleasant. It's yeah, a very intense experience, but then your memory sort of like molds it and shapes it over time, and you look back and you're like, wow, that was like the craziest adventure. And so yeah, like when I gave birth, I made sure to sort of write down the whole thing, because it was just like I want to remember it exactly as it was in this moment. And I know that my memory of it has completely shifted over time, even though I like made a point to say like I know I'm gonna just try to remember it this way. And I think part of it, it kind of speaks to the way that that we can sort of yeah, transform our memories, where um it's weird. Like now I think I actually prefer the version of it that I have now versus then, even though I know the truth is that one. So yeah, and I think like any sort of like anti memes that I come across in my own life, the way to combat or remember them is always just writing things down for me. I definitely like live in my calendar, and I just sort of yeah make sure that if there's something that I'm putting off or I don't want to be doing, like having a just sort of persistent reminder keeps it top of mind for me. Like I think even I write about this in the book. This is a very meta reference, but even the writing of this book about anti-mimetics was anti-mimetic for me, where I had this sort of like ball and collection of notes that was building up over 3 years, And I just like every time I would sit down and try to write about it, it was just sort of like, I know I really, really want to write about this thing, but like I just can't seem to like wrap my head around it. And then I would sort of like leave it. And but it felt really important to me. So I just left it as a file on my desktop to just like keep reminding me. And I like literally every single day I open my laptop, I see it. And eventually kind of just like overcame that desire to forget. But yeah, I'm curious actually, like, yeah, what came to mind for you? If there are any anti-themes that's you found in your own
Yeah.
life or
Well, I thought about a couple. Like I played soccer growing up, and I made it to a decent level. And one of the things I started seeing, which like you do if you stay in sports, is like people use steroids, and there are folks there like you can't talk about it, and because it's illegal. And you see like people on TV, like the guy who plays Jack Reacher is enormous, right? And like probably he's on steroids, but like if you ask him or John Cena, like straight up on live TV, which happens, they're not going to say yes, like I'm on it, like but people know. So it's like this kind of like secret that's held together by like this taboo, like you were talking about, but it has a big impact on many things from like sports to like imagery and social media. So that was one. I thought too about like the Underground Railroad in the United States and how that managed to stay together without like people knew about it, but like it all happens somehow despite that. But it was a little bit harder to spot them today, and I was like, I probably just forget them like so quickly,
yeah,
so quickly.
you probably do. Yeah.
But I thought one category is like good policies that we just forget about over time. Like we have like as a government, or if you're working on like public safety, there are probably some great low cost policies that get implemented, and then people forget that like there's a benefit to it. So it's this like
Yeah.
non-event that's happening. People
I've seen
neglect it
some
over time.
I saw some chatter about this on Twitter recently. There's someone was saying something like, remember the idea of the ozone layer and how this was a really big deal in the 90s and it kind of went away. Like, and then they mentioned they were saying as an example of how like climate advocacy is fake. And then someone else responded saying, well, actually, we did discover that there was a hole in the ozone layer, and enacted all these policies to help mitigate the spread and close back up. And that's why you don't hear about it anymore, because we actually solved the problem. I saw someone else talking about air pollution as a thing that would have killed hundreds of millions of people, and because we just have better policies now around clean air, so many people's lives are saved, and we just don't really think about it anymore. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of things like that where they're hugely consequential on our lives, but we're just somehow they just sort of disappear. And then it's funny that our natural assumption is therefore it was irrelevant or it wasn't important. It's like, no, it might have actually been solved and you just didn't hear about it anymore.
Yeah, it's like these things are victims of their own success, which is like
Yeah.
interesting because like most things when they succeed are like everybody knows about it. Um, I thought like you were talking about how when you're reflecting back on like experiences, like you start to change how you think about it, and like people do this a lot with uncomfortable things looking forward as well, like thinking about death. So there's kind of this protection mechanism. And one thing I thought about, which you may or may not agree with, is when people first start writing online, I think that they express themselves in like really, really complicated language. It doesn't really make sense as like a way of protecting themselves from like exposing like their real ideas. So you just look at it like, oh, this doesn't make any sense, so it doesn't go anywhere. Do you think people like subconsciously adjust their communication to be anti-mimetic when they're first getting into something as a defense mechanism?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I guess my first reaction to that is I would have thought people do the opposite, but I guess it depends on the kind of person that you are and then also what your goals are. So I definitely think for a lot of new writers online or just people creating things online, there's like this initial shyness or fear of, yeah, what if other people don't like it? And so then there's this sort of self-sabotaging behavior that kicks in where you're like, well, if I make it not that great or not that catchy, then maybe people won't pay attention to it, and then that kind of proves my point and whatever. And I think this behavior occurs not just with writing, but a lot of new things, people trying a new hobby or new skill, and they kind of give it a half-hearted shot and then say, well, I tried, but I didn't really try. And so you're kind of like getting in your own way because there's some sort of intrinsic fear around what if it spreads too much or fear of your own success. But I also think like there's the opposite thing that happens for some people where like I think back enviously to like when I started writing, and I think a lot of other people do too, where you kind of don't have anything to lose, and so you can be a lot freer and a lot more candid in the things that you're saying, and it's only as you start to have like maybe more a reputation or feeling like there are people you need to impress or you have something to lose, that then you start kind of self-censoring a little bit, or you start saying things a little bit more mysteriously because you don't want to attract controversy. And I think that speaks to a lot of the mechanics around anti-memetics, and how we why we censor ideas, or why we self-censor the spread of ideas, is because there's sort of like a fear of like, I'm going to lose something, or there's something, if this spreads, it'll be very consequential to me or to the network that I'm a part of, and therefore I kind of want to hold it in. But I think some version of that can happen at like every stage of experience and comfort with writing, or putting yourself out there in any other sort of way.
Yeah, it's another thing it reminds me of is like sales funnels in business. Like it's nice to have like a big funnel, but if all your leads are just total crap, like you have too much attention. And
Hmm.
so like people put like you come filters, but if you put something at the top of a blog post, that immediately just bores people to death. Like only the really dedicated people are going to make it past that. That's kind of like adding an anti-meme strategically to something,
Yeah.
to reduce it. I was curious, like, have you taken this idea of anti-memetics and like how do you advise people based on it? Like, what's the tip that you give people? You've written this book, it's got some great ideas in it. What are the default like things that you give people?
Um, I mean, I think one is just sort of about awareness. I hope that when people read the book, that it prompts them to reflect on, where do anti memes kind of show up in my own life? What am I not noticing that maybe I should be? But I think there's also something around reflecting on what our role is, not just how they affect us individually, but what is our role in sort of like the networks that we're a part of, and the communities that we're in terms of like how ideas spread, right? Because I think the way to combat an anti-meme or make it more visible is to it all kind of comes back down to the individual level, right? So um, when an idea spreads through a network through its nodes, and nodes are just people, so each of us is a node, and when an idea sort of encounters a node, there's, I guess, like three things that could happen. It could bounce right off of you and you kind of reject the idea. You could get really infected by the idea and then start spreading it to everyone else. And then there's kind of a third option where you are personally really absorbed by this idea or taken by it, but you're not quite ready to share it to anyone else, right? And so you're sort of like asymptomatic, where the idea has infected you, but you haven't shown any symptoms or signs that will then start, spreading it to other people. And that's sort of the premise of an anti-meme, right? Is it's just because you're infected by an idea does not always mean that you share it out. And so I think like one that's just a useful mechanic to think about. It's like, what ideas are you sort of like holding on to that maybe would be beneficial to share with other people? And sometimes I think that behavior is warranted. Like I think the reason why anti-memes don't spread is because they are very consequential to a network, and there are some ideas that are good that they stay taboo, and they're good that they are forbidden. Like we don't want to be saying absolutely everything that comes to mind out loud. Um, so I think there's like a natural instinct there where you're trying to sort of like protect your network, you're trying to protect yourself, and that's not a bad thing in itself. But I think there's also this flip side where sometimes you don't share things because you're afraid of consequences that are not really that. Um, it's not that aren't really so warranted to be afraid of, right? Like you don't share things because you're scared of it's going to make you look stupid, or other people aren't going to like it, or yeah, you just think like, you're kind of assuming that other people aren't ready to receive it or something like that. And I would hope that, in reflecting on what are the things that I'm not noticing about the world around me, what are the things that I'm sort of holding on to but not sharing, that I hope people sort of come up with this sense of like, oh, there are some things that maybe I should try to force myself to share, maybe because I have a responsibility to try to change the reality and world around me. I talk a lot about attention in sort of the second half of the book, and how attention shapes our present realities. And I think this is true in both directions of, you can, if you don't like what you see in the world around you, then maybe you should think about ways that you can sort of change the way that you relate to it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Like, and it's nice to hear that there's a positive spin on it too. It's like maybe like you forgot that you knew something that was like super valuable, and like, oh, like when you I had a friend who like put a bag of chips back in the drawer like the other day. I saw him do it, and he like folded it together like origami. He didn't like clip it or anything, and it was all sealed. I was like, how'd you know how to do that? He's like, I don't know, just this is always how I've done it. Like, I would have never thought to like do show and tell about this like bag of chips thing. So I
And
guess
I'm
that
curious. I'm
qualifies.
like, I buy those little chip clips, but I need to learn the origami fold, I guess.
Yeah, you like kind of like take the two sides and like fold it in and tuck it. I'll send you a video.
Yeah, it never
Um,
works for me when I try.
um, yeah, but it'd be nice to talk more about attention. You have a chapter of your book called "We Are Our Attention," and could you talk about like connect the dots between what you talked about in SOP 23 of like Whitehead and Kafka protocols? So kind of like these good and bad versions of a protocol and the relationship that that has with attention and the impact of attention on like living a good life.
Yeah. So the piece that I wrote for SOP 23 was called Dangerous Protocols. And I was taking the angle of saying, okay, look, sometimes protocols are good for us and they have all these benefits, but also sometimes protocols are bad and they can, or let's just call them dangerous. And, and because they can sort of deflect our attention away from processes and systems that maybe we really should be paying closer attention to. And so I present a few different models for this, but the two that you're talking about, this like, the good version being the Whitehead protocol and the bad version being the Kafka protocol. And so the good version is taken from this line from Alfred Whitehead about civilization advancing based on the number of operations that we're able to automate. And basically saying like, we need to be able to free up our time and our attention through the automation of processes that we don't need to be thinking about, right? And so that's like the protocols at their best help us just manage and process massive amounts of information because they give us this like clearly defined process to say, okay, when I encounter this thing, like I'm just going to outsource it to this protocol that I already have. I don't need to go through and reevaluate it every single time. That's a really good thing. And yes, I don't think we could function if we didn't have some version of these protocols. So it frees up our attention. The bad version of the protocols is this sort of like Kafka-esque model where you're sort of trapped in this maze where you can't. You're kind of lost. You have this sense that there's something here that you need to be paying closer attention to, something that needs to be, that you need to drill down on, but somehow every time you look at it more closely, you just get more and more confused. And that's sort of the bad version of protocols. And so I talk a little bit in the book about the idea of bureaucracies as anti-memplexes, where so like a memeplex is when you have a bunch of, it's sort of like a collection of different memes that interact together to form some cohesive sense of like identity or a brand. So like a political identity or a fashion trend or something might be a collection of different memes and that's like a memeplex. An anti-memeplex is a collection of anti-memes, so a bunch of different things that we have a really hard time looking at, paying attention to, like training our attention on, and they're all sort of interacting together to sort of keep us away from something that might be actually important to look at. And so this is where I think anti-memes come up a lot in a sort of political context or a policy context, where there's so many things that we should probably be paying attention to, that's so much low-hanging fruit in the policy sphere that maybe just needs someone to be able to sort of like focus their attention on for a longer period of time and not flinch and not look away from this sort of like Kafka type protocol, who is someone who's brave enough to kind of go through that whole maze and figure it out and untangle it. But yeah, there are a lot of examples of these sorts of things. So yes, I think like the relationship between protocols and attention is protocols at their best are, well, protocols functionally serve to help free up our attention to focus on other things. And when we trust that the protocol is functioning well, then that's great. And when the protocol becomes dysfunctional, then it can actually be really hard to go in and troubleshoot because we just can't seem to look at the thing that is in front of our eyes.
Yeah, that the distinction between like just an anti-meme and an anti-memeplex, like you could look at like a bad protocol as like taking your attention away from something, but then an anti-memeplex is like to the point where you would need to spend so much time to wrap your head around it and to like expose yourself and like build up an image of it. This is like more like SCP Object 55, like is a anti-memeplex where if you look at it, it's just so horrendous and like terrible that you just can't stand it. Like looking at the TSA or like some bundle of policy work, you're like, this is, I don't ever want to touch this. If I touch this, I'm going to spend my whole life working on it, and that's too terrifying. Uh,
Yeah, healthcare is an example I talk about in the book. It's like, you know, it's incredible that we've managed to pass any sort of healthcare reform in the United States, because it's, who wants to think about healthcare? It's a huge mess and yeah, tangle of ideas.
it's a mess. It's so scary to think about. We have a good question in the chat from our resident curmudgeon, Venkat. Uh, are ghosting and gaslighting related to anti-memes and common knowledge phenomena? Feels like they're in the same area.
Yeah, I guess so. If we think of, well, ghosting being just sort of like ideas disappearing, or but I don't know, gaslighting at least. Ooh, fancy. Yeah, gaslighting I could see related to antunes, where you're trying to change other people's. It's sort of uh, an adversarial move, I guess, where you're trying to change someone's relationship to an idea by saying, "Oh, that's an idea that you think you care about. Well, actually, you don't care about it." Yeah, yes, gaslighting is turning something into an anti meme. Um, yeah, I guess it'd be fun to think about like where, yeah, strategies to. I do talk about this a little bit in the book, but more in terms of, you know, how can you make an idea more visible or more hidden, and a lot of that has to do with sort of like messaging and how you're framing and describing and talking about an idea, because like it's not that an idea is intrinsically mimetic or anti-mimetic. A lot of it has to do with the person that is receiving the idea, the network that it's situated in. There are a lot of ideas that might completely transform or transfix a specific network, and other people it kind of just bounces off. Like I think a lot of conspiracy theories are like this, where for some reason like a certain network is obsessed with the idea, but then most people come across the idea and they're like, that's not real. And so but yeah, the gaslighting would be another example, I guess, of not just sort of like messaging an idea in a different way, but like actively trying to, yeah, not knock your opponent out and say like this isn't even a real thing, so don't pay attention to it.
Like, what are you talking about? That's not
Yeah.
real. You didn't see that. That's so crazy. One of my favorite bits of all time is like these two news anchors. Um, and one of them was like, "Stop gaslighting me." He's like, "Gaslighting isn't real. It's a fake word, and you made it up." And I was like, "Okay, that's great." Um, one, what was it? What was my question? Um, yeah, as you've like written this and you're like thinking about how to like increase the mimetic potential of something, or like decrease it, use anti-memes and regular memes. Um, have you thought about which mediums, like how that affects the mimetic potential of stuff? So like, are there some mediums which are more anti-mimetic than others when information gets passed through it? Like we were talking about when you scroll on your phone at night, like after 11 p.m. you just forget it all. Like that's very anti-mimetic, just like the flat screen with no texture late at night, versus something like, oh, if you're in person in a room with one other like conversationist, like you're gonna remember that because it's so bizarre. Are
Yeah.
there any particular mediums today that we have online that are more anti-mimetic than others?
Yeah, surface level, I would say, I guess I would have thought of like the feed or public feeds as mimetic in the sense of, and I have some other crazy side project version of this that I need to like, I did not make its way into the book, but like it's something I continue to be sort of obsessed over, around like this idea that we kind of enter like a hypnotic state when we're in, you know, kind of like scrolling and scrolling, like your brain is like just truly in a different place. And what does that mean for your receptiveness to ideas? So like I suspect that when you are in a sort of like hypnotic or suggestible state, then you can kind of just like receive ideas and they kind of just start like passing through you much more easily than if you're actively engaged in conversation like we are right now, where, you know, it's one-on-one, and if you say something that sounds a little crazy, I'm gonna, you know, it's gonna engage some part of my brain where I'm like, you know, like, is that really true? And then we'll have a little debate about it and stuff. Whereas when you're sort of like doom scrolling or whatever, you're just kind of like, oh, cool, grab, pass it on to someone else, and it's sort of just like you become more of like a air traffic controller, just like sending ideas to other people, and then it's kind of spreading more easily. Um, and I think this is where like the rise of whatever, we got to come up with some other term for cozy web, I guess, but the sort of like smaller group kind of chats and things can foster can at least provide a home for some of these more anti-memetic ideas, where if you're in a smaller group chat, like the reason why that works better is because it's closer to replicating, at least in certain contexts, this trusted interaction that you have, where it's like a small group of people, who all the people are in theory, and when someone says something in there, you just treat it with much higher respect than you would for just sort of random stuff passing through your brain.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to think about it. So like by default, like most people are in a state that they're a lot more like in a place of being hypnotized and just scrolling through stuff and like having that just immediately get set into their heads without much awareness. So that like really is an anti-meme. Like you're not even aware of the exposure at that point, and you like forget that you know it, but you might start acting differently based on that information, even if it's so slight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of, you may not really retain much memory of what's happening, but then you are much more likely, I think, to pass things on because your sort of, bullshit detector is just off somehow, or you're just kind of, yeah, it's you're just much more suggestible somehow.
Yeah, so it's like there are mediums where like you're just less aware of the information being transmitted to you. I saw this like tweet the other day, which was like kind of kitsch. Like I'm not a huge fan of stuff like this, but it was like you wonder why you don't have an imagination and you're constantly blasting your brain with information 24/7. It's like, but maybe you have some thoughts on like, is this idea of hypnotism and scrolling the feed, does that tie into your research on meditation right now?
Yeah, it definitely does. That's where I'm sort of like, it's a thing that keeps tickling my brain, and I haven't quite been able to sort out what it all means. But uh, just in thinking about like, that grip when you get into a certain scrolling kind of state where it's like it's really hard to break yourself out of it, and like it's just a strange sensation. And I think it's some version of like a flow state, but it's not really a positive one. I think like watching TV could have been like this in the past, or still is, where you're just sort of like binging and like, yeah, letting stuff come, uh, just like pass right through your brain. I'm really, yeah, I'm really scared of being in those kinds of states. And so I try to avoid putting them in my life as much as possible. But and again, I think this is where sort of like awareness of, when I feel myself starting to get into those states, I just kind of try to like break the circuit and kind of be like, okay, like put it down, go do something else, because you're tired, so do something else that's low energy but not hypnotic. But yeah, I have a lot of unanswered questions around that.
Yeah, it's almost like an area that would be ripe for some sort of calling it health and safety protocols like too much. Like that's my background, and like when people say like we need safety protocols for this, it's too much. Like, but having some sort of rules and procedures around engaging with like anti-mimetic services like the feed, or like getting into a new group chat where you don't know people, I think there is like some common wisdom that people don't feel like they need to share what their techniques are. Like they don't know what defense mechanisms that they've adopted already in terms of protecting themselves against that state. But reading your book would probably get them to think about a bit more like, oh, I probably do some good things here already, and maybe I should share that with some friends about like how to engage
Yeah.
the feed smarter.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really tough question to answer, right? I mean, and people they try doing like the time limit thing on apps. I ignore every time I set up a time limit. It's like I just ignore it, right? Like I don't actually observe it.
Yeah.
I remember, was it like Instagram? They were doing like the things where, or like there are these TikToks that'll pop up where it's like, stop and drink some water. Like, are you? Which is like an insane thing that we have to insert into feeds because but we do that, and I don't know how all those things really work. So yeah, I don't really know. There's this fine balance between not wanting to sort of override someone's choices and their experience, but then also how do you help people self-regulate when it's really, really hard to stop?
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to touch on was this idea of like scrolling. And I've seen some numbers coming out recently about how like memory deficits and like attention deficits in teenagers are like going up pretty significantly post 2015,
Hmm.
ostensibly because of the use of phones. And we don't have to get into that, but what do you feel like is the tension between long-term memory as like a source of orientation and having a flexible, adaptable sense of attention? Because I know at the start of your book, you go into this like interesting exploration of like your own experience with your memory, which is like more on the short-term memory, highly adaptive side, as you've seen from your journal, the example you shared, which I thought was great. But yeah, what's the tension between having a good memory that serves as like a compass and having kind of a shorter memory that allows you to be more adaptable and focus your attention elsewhere?
Yeah, it is a funny question for me, which I opened the book with and talking about my own really realization that I have basically like no memory of my life, and not realizing this is not maybe a common experience. And so yeah, there's for me, attention and memory are sort of decoupled, right? Where at least just using myself as an example again, I think I have exceptionally good focus and I'm not someone who gets easily distracted. I spend most of my day just like heads down, like single task, like deep sort of work. And the temptation to deviate from that is very low for me. So I would say like my attention in the present reality is quite high. It's very easy for me to be absorbed in a moment, but then my long-term memory is completely useless. I don't remember anything unless I write it down and kind of revisit it and practice it. And so I think attention is something that we use to, create and define our present realities. Um, Everything that we see and are observing and feeling in the moment is filtered through this selective attention and focus. But we still need to find ways to actually preserve what we're seeing in the moment. And so I talk about these two roles in the book. One is the role of the truth teller, and the other is the role of the champion. And a truth teller is someone who can kind of help shake people out of this their moment and kind of notice their surroundings or notice what's going on around them, right? They're a little bit of a jump starter. So the proverbial, boy saying that the emperor has no clothes, and everyone kind of knows this thing. Everyone is suppressing the truth, and you need someone to just kind of come out and say it, and everyone goes, "Oh yeah, of course." And so I think that's the role of the truth teller, where they can kind of like snap and like draw people's attention to what is going on in the moment, but I don't think that guarantees that you'll actually remember the thing long term. And so that's more the role of the champion. And the champion is someone who is actually doing the hard work day to day and just kind of working tirelessly to make sure that people don't forget things. And so you need both these roles, someone to kind of be the initiator, be the spark that reminds people of something, and then you also need a champion, or someone who is tasked with actually like preserving and recording and keeping these memories. So yeah, I think we need both of those things. I also think this is where just like institutional efforts to preserve memory are really important. Well, I guess like on the personal level, it's things like we all have versions of institutionalizing things like writing things down or taking photos, things like that. But then on the collective level, it's also traditions that we have, holidays, memorials. Yeah, the way that we record and remember things as a civilization, and we need those things. Just they help us remember stuff because otherwise we would just forget about them.
Yeah, definitely. And from personal experience, the people that have those tendencies, like that differ a lot, seem to not get along very well. Like there's this always this urge, like, oh, like you are just so aggressive about having to need new things and get rid of the old stuff without thinking about it. And I don't like that. So I'm not going to spend time with you. But like in an institution or an organization, like keeping those forces present and somewhat in balance is super important. Like if your organization is just all about memory and like replicating your first product, unless you've cracked the code and managed to keep it secret for 100 years, like you're going to fail to a competitor. And the other way around too, like if you're just a government trying to innovate constantly without any foundation, that's not going to be great for your citizens. I was curious, like, we have a question. Did you read Nexus by Harari? Like this?
I have not actually.
Okay,
I would love some thoughts or yeah, I don't.
I have not read it either, so we'll
Okay.
skip that question. But yeah, can you talk about the meme about anti-memes? This one that Ben Cat shared, which I thought was interesting. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It was like a meme about anti-memes. Do you think there's
Um,
something to that?
yeah, it's clever. I mean, yeah, I don't know if anything like deeper to share about it. It makes me think about. I talk a little bit about like vibes in the book, and the emerging importance, re-emergence and importance of vibes. And I think vibes are trying to find that sort of in between version of like how do you spread a feeling mimetically. Um, so I talk about some aesthetic versions of vibes, um, like Parisian chic, and like you can't quite fully define what that is, but everyone kind of knows it when they see it. They kind of know how to replicate and imitate it, and then they can sort of like pass around in a mimetic way, even though it's like not something that's really easy to define. But yeah, I love the idea of like more like hardline memes, like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas is definitely a way of like passing around an idea without talking about the idea. There's another example I talk about in the book. This prank that happened, I don't know how many years ago now, but this like eye mouth eye prank where it was like three emoji that were being passed around on Twitter of like an eye, a mouth, and an eye, and it was just like spreading everywhere, and it was sort of like, but no one knew what it was, and it started just as a complete shit post, and then it started turning into a bigger thing, and people were fundraising, and like VCs were reaching out trying to like get in early on the eye mouth eye round, and then in the end they kind of revealed there's actually nothing here, we're just passing around a thing, and it doesn't really mean anything, which was then upset a lot of people. But point being, you can kind of like hype up a thing without talking about what the thing actually is, and draw a lot of attention to it without actually talking about what the underlying thing is. So yeah, I think that could be like tactically useful. It can also, it can also have, I guess, like be not so great when there's nothing really behind the curtain. But it's I guess if you're trying to, sometimes there are anti memes that we want to keep people away from, but sometimes we actually do want to talk about it without talking about the thing. And so, yeah, it's I think useful tactic to let the idea spread.
Yeah, true. The Vegas thing is almost like the premise in Harry Potter, where it's like he who shall not be named. You're talking about this thing because like
I was
if
thinking
you
that,
say the words,
yeah.
it's gonna come to
Right.
life. Um, but it got me thinking too about like New Year's resolutions, which are like these things like are all about anti-memes. Like it's the anti-meme holiday where every year everybody tries to like get themselves to believe in something again, and they they all fail. But it's like every year we're gonna get together. We have a few good ideas that we're gonna try and remember and like keep it top of mind for as long as we can.
The anti-mimetic holiday, I like that.
Yeah.
um,
Um, but yeah, I was like, do you have any other thoughts about your book that you wanted to share? Everybody here should buy it. Obviously, it's a great
Obviously.
book. Obviously, buy it. Make sure that you understand what an anti-meme is, so you can protect yourself and find good things that you know and share it with people. But yeah, do you have any thoughts about
Yeah.
like how was writing the book? Did you like it, or like once you got
It
past
was
the hump?
fun. Yeah, I think because a lot of the suffering around it had already kind of happened in drips and bits, like over the last few years, where then I just sort of had this like big nasty ball of like notes and things, and they were messy. And then it's always fun to see. Like initially when I pitched the idea to Yancey about publishing it, it was the original outline looked one way, and then once I got into it, then it looked completely different. Um, and I think like I didn't take the idea very seriously, honestly, when I first started writing it. I didn't know if it was going to turn into a book. I was kind of just like, look, there's just something tickling my brain that I need to get out, or else it's just going to haunt me forever. But it was really fun to see it that yeah, I thought of it as a sort of like flippant, silly idea, to be totally honest. And then like once I got into it, I was just like, oh, actually, I think this has a lot of implications for, both just like how we conduct our lives, how we interact with each other, and how we make meaning from the things that we do day to day. So it was a really fun project to work on.
Nice. Do you have time for one question? There's the one in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Natasha Godwin asks, what type of ideas are best developed in private and in public? What frameworks do you use to decide when to share an idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think without being too prescriptive about it, because it probably depends on the idea, um, but I think there's some felt sense that it's good to workshop some ideas in private before they go public. I've never really been a fan of the like do everything in public because transparency is good kind of thing, despite writing a book on open source. But I just actually, I mean, kind of the point of that book was that I don't think that works, because then you just kind of get, random people kind of piling in and stuff. And so there's some sense of when an idea is precious and it's still just a little baby, it's like very vulnerable and it can't defend itself from the world. You kind of got to protect it a little bit. You want to you want to workshop it with people that really understand the idea, and then and then slowly start to socialize more and more. I probably err a little too far on the side of being a more like private idea workshopper and developer. I could, half the advice I'm sharing in here is stuff that I should be taking myself as well, of forcing things to go, share them a little bit more widely, not be afraid to share things in public. So maybe I'm not the best judge of that, but yeah, I think a really nice something I came away with from writing this book is that I think it's not that we got rid of the highly public online web and our feeds and everything. We didn't revert back to some former version of the internet where everything was just on forums and emails and stuff. It's more that we have both of these worlds existing in parallel now. Like we literally just saw the invention of an entire universe, which is so cool. Like the semi-private or private online sphere just didn't really exist in any meaningful form until fairly recently, like the last, whatever, let's call it 5-10 years. And so it's really cool to see that, before that, now we have both a highly relevant public online world and a well-functioning sort of private online world, and these two things sort of interact with each other now. So we have more options now for how we want to workshop ideas than we did before, which is, I think, really cool.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. And I think if you're able to, exist in both worlds, that's a huge advantage to whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's
Yeah.
nice to talk to you.
Yeah, super fun.
I have a spiel I'll do, so I'll take you off the screen and I'll do my spiel. But
cool.
Yeah, have a good one.
Yeah, let's see you.
Thank you everybody for watching. The next talk is with Saram Kanan, the CEO of Eigenlayer, next Wednesday, April 18th. Tune into that to learn more about technical protocols and a world that's built on protocols of all kinds. What will that world look like? Tune in next week to find out.